Welcome back to the show. Gabe, Yanez, and I, we are joined by Jeremy Montes. Him and I, we met at a recent Jiu-Jitsu memorial event for his son, Jared Jr. And I really felt, I listened to the way Senior spoke. I listened to what he had to say about his son's legacy, about lessons that he's learned. And I was really touched. And I really felt like we needed him on the podcast to share some of the insights, some of the things that he's learned throughout this journey with our audience, and also to help talk about Jared Jr. and keep his legacy moving forward and help all of us just to be better men, better fathers, better husbands. So Jeremy, thank you for being on the show. We really appreciate it. I think a great place to start, man, is tell us a little bit more about you before we talk about your son, and tell us about your background, because I think that does play a role into who your son, the man that he became.
All right, my background. Dad, right? A father of three children. Jared's the youngest. He has two older sisters. Before that, I was a young Marine. We were stationed down south. Jared was the only one born in Santa Cruz, and he would remind us all that he was the only one that was 100% local, right? Mm-hmm. Even though I grew up there since I was probably 5 years old. But let's see, in the jiu-jitsu community, he was a bit of a prodigy. He started it first. He actually had got me to start training, him and Master Claudio, and that's pretty much it. I lived the rest of my life kind of trying to live the life that he would have lived in the way that he would have lived, but at the same time, sharing the things that I've learned through our time together, and how that's helping me go forward.
So just for some context for everyone listening, you're a Marine, your husband, or your father of three, and your son was diagnosed. It was leukemia, and
that's correct. Yeah,
it was ALL, wasn't it?
Yep.
So and I told you when I saw you, my daughter was diagnosed with the same thing at a younger age, right? So same diagnosis, and your son, correct me if I'm wrong, was diagnosed at 19. Was that right?
18. Yeah.
And tell us a little bit more about, he's a prodigy in jiu-jitsu. Obviously, I saw the images of him, and he's created his own movement, stuff that was like gnarly. You demonstrated it. It was absolutely beautiful. But a little bit more about him, and then I just think there's a lot to unpack here. So I just want to give context to the story of what occurred and where you at, what occurred and with Jared Jr.
Absolutely. Talking about Jared, he was such an incredible and interesting individual, just as this human that you could go hours and hours and hours. But just to get it started, he was a prodigy. He was hitting it. He was doing great. He was doing things that hadn't been done before. And all of a sudden, one few days before Christmas, he went to the hospital, and I get a call, and it's Christmas shopping and everything, and his mom says, "Hey, why don't you come to the hospital?" And so I did, and I showed up, and that's when they said they think it's cancer. I said, "What?" And I walked over to him, and she just reached out and embraced me, and there's only a couple of times that he cried, and that was one of them. The next thing I know, I'm following an ambulance to Stanford. Kind of just works that way. It's just these flash memories. I don't remember what happened in between the time where I walked into the emergency room, went back behind the curtain. They told me that we embraced, and then it was okay. We got to get him to Stanford. We're driving there, and everything just started. The treatment started. And he finished that course of treatment, and then that had suppressed it. It wasn't detectable anymore. And then he got to have a year of continued treatment but a year of being cancer free. And he would train every single time he could. Every time there was no port, every time there was no, limitations to his blood counts and anything like that, he was always on the mat, even if he was 20 pounds lighter, right? And he was a pretty light guy, but it was that kind of spirit that kept me going and kept me training when all I wanted to do was just, curl up on a couch and just ride out the day. We're just remembering how he would endure everything and he would train hard, and that was his outlet.
Jeremy, were there, and I really appreciate you sharing this story. I've obviously heard, Jason's story many times, and it's one thing that I shared with Jason as now a new parent. I have a 2-year-old son and a 9-month-old daughter. I've now, known Jason long enough where I knew of his story with Ava and stuff before being a parent, and have now heard it after. And it's so different. It's so different. And it's always a little tough for me because you immediately imagine that happening to you, and it takes a completely new dimension when you actually have like a face and a name to put to that. And it's in many ways, it always like gives me chills and just knocks me back to even have that thought go through my mind. Then it makes me very, very grateful, and also makes me very appreciative of people like you that, have turned this into a positive and sharing and all the things that we're going to get into. So first of all, I just want to appreciate it. But if were there any like signs before that initial like trip to the hospital? Because I know, Jason recently talked about just things with Ava here and there, but was there anything before that?
Sure. Now that we think about it, there was times when he in his training where his joints were aching a lot. His joints just were starting to ache, and then it's just like, okay, yeah, what's wrong? You're just what are you whining about? You just don't want to train hard today. What was it? And that's kind of what it was. Then I think that he started to have some brain fog or kind of like a little bit of difficulty being as engaged as he used to be. He would enjoy a lot of just going down to this place called Rockview, and then just that's where the surf was. And if he wasn't surfing, he would just get up early and go and sit there. And it's not something I can say that he always did. So there must have been something that was very calming about that for him. And I can only imagine. I did a great deal of attempting to imagine what all of this must have felt like for him. And so that's all I can do is like maybe, he's feeling something inside that just wasn't right. And he would go to Rockview and he would just let the ocean kind of calm him. Yeah. So joints, physically, I think that was it. Yeah, his knees, shoulders, things like that. And I remember the knees a lot.
And I'm wondering, based on when I met you, it sounded like with Jer, it was in the jiu-jitsu is life, and then going to the hospital, come back out, jiu-jitsu, going to the hospital, come back out, jiu-jitsu as much as possible, right, within reason. And on this show, we talk about fitness as an outlet. We talk about fitness as a way to develop yourself mentally and physically for sure, but even more importantly, mentally. And I'm wondering, from my own personal experience, I found that jiu-jitsu provided me so much when my daughter was sick, so much. And I'm wondering what you've seen through jiu-jitsu and fitness, right? Just working out. For Jer, like how did he use jiu-jitsu as a tool? And then how do you use fitness as a tool at the time in particular, like to overcome adversity, right? And yes, it's something we talk about a lot, and I think you're uniquely qualified to talk about it more.
I'm actually really interested to hear what that was for you. You know, I'm very familiar how it was for me. Again, I do my best to understand how that was for him. But as we go down this path, it's just like moments just like this where I hear from another person just like you, and I'm like, okay, tell me now, you know, help me to see a little bit more. Because a lot of times, you know, you kind of feel like you're the only person that's ever been through this, right?
Mm.
And even though you know that you're not, but that feeling is just so great. It's so intense. It's so overwhelming. You can't help but realize you're just the only person that it has felt this way to, because it's unique that way. It has its own fingerprint. So jiu-jitsu for Jer was, I have to imagine, you know, all of the corticosteroids, right, and everything that was always used to reduce inflammation. And you remember all the uses for that, but then you remember how, you know, like prednisone is very much high anxiety, right? It's just kind of rages in you. It kind of just it's a ton of anxiety, and I think that jiu-jitsu allowed him to expend that energy, right? But
Mm.
also do it in a place that he loved. Um, you know, he never thought he was anything great, you know, but he was just always wonderful to watch. His jujitsu is, like I said, I'll train for the rest of my days, and I'll still never get to the level of jujitsu that he had displayed so naturally. I really think that that's what it was. That's what worked for him. It was home. It was home because he had so much love and support there. I don't think he ran to it for love and support, but I think that when you're dealing with it, man, that's the perfect place to be, right?
Mm.
Uh, for me, um, you know, I would just have to say that jujitsu immediately after he had to leave. That's what I call it. You know, he had to leave. He didn't want to leave. That's what he had said. I don't want to leave you. So when he had to leave, I remember, you know, the same thing I said. I just wanted to be on the couch. But I remember that he would get up and train, and I would get up and I would go because he would, right? And
Mm.
because he can't now. So I would cry the whole way there, right? I try to wear sunglasses, right? But then those things fog up. Um, and I would just do that all the way to the parking lot, dry my eyes, walk up to the door, dry my eyes one more time. Class would already have been started, and I walked to the dressing room. And it was a grace that they gave to me to you know, to show up whenever. And I tried to get there on time, but you know, a lot of time wasted just trying to be presentable and get in there. Once I would start the training, you can't help but be present, right? The mind is what's causing so much of the depression. And the mind, because the mind's never in the present, it's always in the past or it's in the future. It's in the past or it's in the future. So jiu-jitsu requiring you to be present helps to quiet the mind.
Mm.
And that's what I found was, you know, there was just 2 hours of not feeling that, 2 hours of feeling good. Then you have to deal with, is it okay to feel good? You know, it's kind of the first part. Is it okay to feel good? Is it okay to feel happy in this moment? Remember where you just came from. So that's just kind of a continuing work in progress. You know, as far as I say, you know, people would always say he would want this for you, he would want that for you, he would want you to be happy. But you know, I'm speaking to two fathers here, and when they're not there, you kind of just say, I should just be exactly the way I am. I
Mm.
shouldn't be happy. I should be the way that I am because he's not here. Or, right, if yours weren't here, how would you try to hide that?
You know, for I don't know how you feel, right? Like I have gone through something not even remotely close because, you know, my daughter is here with us, and I've been around a lot of families who have seen both sides, right? Gone through a lot of treatment and came out the other side and gone through a lot of treatment and, are no longer here. Right. And
Yep.
it's impossible for me to place myself in your shoes. Impossible.
Well, but you had that moment, right? You had those moments where your mind thinks about the future and it says, is this going to happen? Am I prepared for this? Right. And then, that's overwhelming in itself. I had those moments and I had no idea that would happen. I remember one July that led up to, it was in that same year and he passed away in December. He went in for stem cell, transplant in September. And I remember in July, I just had this very strange, alone feeling. And an alone feeling meaning like, what if I didn't have him anymore? And I remember I texted his mother, because that's the only other person, and we're not married. But I just shared that feeling, and then, she did her best to say, I'm always going to be here for you guys, this, that, and the other. And then you just pass through that moment and then realize, I remember my aunt had said something before this is years before Jer ever got sick. And she knew how much I love my kids. And she said, be careful how much you love your kids. And then I said, why is that? And then she said, just because she referred to a story in the Bible by the story of Job. I don't know if you know that story. But he was tested. And that's the biggest point of the story is that to the level that he was tested for his faith, or would he ever, denounce his faith or something like that. And when everything had happened and Job had lost everything, and then I believe it was like something horrible had happened and a roof crushed his family. And then he said, he cried out, the thing that I have feared most is upon me now. So she was kind of just saying, be careful how much you put your love on the line and expose it, because that might be the one thing you're tested on. Now, I don't say that, but I'm just saying, I'm not saying that was what was happening, right? I actually believe that Jer had a very unique purpose to be here for a short period of time to inspire a great many people. His story went overseas. First, it spread out through the whole U.S. There was a huge movement for him. Like I said, at a time when cross training wasn't really big, it was kind of frowned upon. But then, I remember there was just lots of support, lots of open mats, lots of things to generate the awareness for Jer. And like a good friend of mine, Renato Tavares, had said, he's like, Jer's purpose was to bring us all together, to be one team together, not individual flags fighting against each other in competition, as we're, that's just what we do. But at one time to just say that we're all together, and brought us together that way. And lots of boundaries and borders were crossed at that time.
Right.
Yeah.
I wanted to
go ahead.
I was on your son's social media, actually, and I was looking at a post from 2014, August 2014. And it's a post of you and him sitting on like a cement block. At the time, he's a purple belt, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
and he writes,
yeah.
He writes, I don't know how I would have turned out if this man wasn't by my side through my 19 years on Earth. And that's powerful. Very, very powerful. Very powerful to me. And I get emotional thinking about that, because I ask myself, how would my son present that. And this is him writing this. This isn't you. This is him writing this about you. And I'm wondering, through this experience, right? What would you tell like your younger self? What would you change anything about how you approach fatherhood, knowing that maybe your time was limited? Would you have changed anything? Because whatever you did was incredible, obviously. But I guess for dads listening, coming from a father who, has gone through what you've gone through, in hindsight, would you have done anything different? Because that is our opportunity today to take action on those things that we can do. They're in our control.
Absolutely, right? I mean, but just more would have been, what would I have done differently? Everything that I did right, I would have wanted to do more, right? Love him more, give more of my time. I was blessed with a work that allowed me to be present with him. And friends would say you had more time with him than most fathers have with their children. And I see that, and I'm very thankful for that every day, because that work wasn't something a career that I sought after. It was just something that happened where, 2008, the bubble burst. A buddy of mine reached out and he said, "Hey, can you do me a favor? Take this exam, get this cert." And that just kind of led into this work that allowed me to just, from I think the age of 10, we got to do so many fun things together, racing bikes, doing a flat track circuit up and down California, going to all the tournaments together, traveling around the world together. So what would I have done differently? I don't know, like taking less time for myself, right? Because I know that I'm always going to have time for myself, but I'm not going to have that time to put back in that bank of time that I get to have with him. There was plenty of times being away. I remember once I had to go away to an Army school because I was doing the National Guard with my daughter, my oldest daughter, and so I had to go away to a school, and he was doing a PANS camp with Kaio, and I remember Kaio's wife said, "No, he's not staying in the hotel. He's staying with us," right? So he did. He stayed with them, and that was actually some funny videos he would send me. They were all quiet at the dinner table, and he was showing this the camera being real quiet, and everybody's just silent. And then it comes back to him, and the camera shows his face. He was just exposed to some really good guys, really big guys, and they are pivotal in remembering him, and his place. And yeah, man, it's hard to say what would you do different. I think
just that in
kid.
itself is powerful, though, Jeremy. I'm just letting you know, like what you just said is powerful to me because I'm asking you in hindsight, and you're like, dude, would have done more. I mean, like not many. I'm just letting you know. I don't think many men, and I'm reflecting on that. Right? It's like how many of us can say that? It's like, dude, that's powerful to be able to say that. So yeah, Gabe, I don't.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we've talked about on the podcast a little loosely before, and I looked it up because it's something that I've read, but I wanted to see what the exact numbers are. And Jeremy, obviously, your story is the extreme and obviously very tragic example of this, but this applies to everyone. It's that about 90% of the time you'll spend with your child is spent before they turn 18. That's for everyone, right? Yep. And 75% of that time is before they turn 12. Like, I think that something I try to remind myself a lot is that, that's just very true. And it feels, especially now because my kids are so young, it can easily feel like forever. It can easily feel like, well, I'll have plenty of time to spend time with them later or prioritize other things. But God, it's so limited. It's so limited regardless of anything, any curveball that life is going to throw your way, and they will throw curveballs. And I think that, what you brought up is just the best advice that anybody can give other parents, young parents. Just do more with them, be more intentional. One thing that we talk a lot about here at Train Hard is this idea of train, protect, provide. And provide sometimes gets like myopically viewed as like, what's the paycheck that you're getting every 2 weeks? But if that's being done at the expense of the time you're spending with your family,
my climb up the ladder, right?
Right,
Lots
right.
of things
And
get put in front of us. Yeah.
Man,
Yeah.
and it's just like, obviously there's a need for that, but it can so easily turn into something where you're doing it at the expense of this other thing that you're literally never going to get back. There's no amount of money in the world that's going to get you those years back, those experiences back. And I think it's such a powerful reminder. So again, I really appreciate you sharing it and bringing it to life in such a real way. But man, it's something that it's easy to forget, especially when your kids are young, but it's so important to remember.
There's still times today where I'll remember him saying something or wishing he had something. And of course, even today, 10 years later, I'll still say out loud, like, I wish I could have got you more. I wish I could have given you more. I wish I could have, and I could have. And I'll go through that and I'll be like, yeah, I could have actually spent that on this one thing that he wanted more. Right. And I know that a lot of that doesn't really mean much. I think, though, we won't put it on finances and and spending more money. But it's just more of being more selfless towards ourselves and just giving more to your child. And like I said, I'm not saying financially, that you have to go and spend all the money on the world on them, right? But I would say what you do have, you should give, right? Because in the end, in hindsight, what was that for? Saving what? For what?
How has your faith changed or evolved?
I would say it's completely evolved. I was always raised in the faith, but that was during the time, the hippie days. So, we'll say late 60s, 70s, and there was a big hippie movement and there was all of that type of faith, but the bare basics of the foundation was always there. And then becoming a young Marine, finding yourself in a time of war, there was plenty of times that I realized that my maker was right there with me, that God was right there with me. But then life gets going and you get distracted and then you're just challenged with other things. I wouldn't say that I was always a holy roller, you know what I'm saying? I wasn't always that way, and I don't think I am now. I think that what I do is I have a firm belief that my maker has my life planned out for me in the same way that we all have as individuals, our lives are already mapped out for us. In my time, I remember when Jared was sick and a good friend of mine actually is going to be out here visiting tomorrow. He had expressed to someone in my family, like, if things don't work out, I really wonder, I fear for Jared Senior's faith. And I wouldn't say that was ever an issue. If anything, like, I don't know if I mentioned this at the seminar, but there were times where okay, let me rewind. Jared Jr. was after 18, right? We had this thing worked out where he would pay rent in the form of an envelope, and he would have that money in there, and I would just keep it in a desk drawer because someday he'd want to move out, right? And then you need a first and a last, and hey, there it is. This is what that's for. Okay. But after he had to leave, there's that money just sitting there, and I didn't want it to go and turn into money in the bank. So I left it there, and then one day I went down to a harbor, and there was a little sailboat, and I bought it, and I just would spend my hours there, sanding it, doing this, cleaning it, getting it repaired. And in those times, There were so many times I would pull the hatch closed and just cry. I would, kind of like just beg for unrealistic things, beg for him to give me back my son. But it was never out of any disrespect, right? It was just pleading for this to just be a bad dream. I would say that since then, my faith has grown more because I've seen God's real ability, promises, come more true than anything. One thing that has been, we were just at a private lesson in Del Rey with Master Hanato, and there's some real big timers out there that pay for his time. And this one guy has this big 40-acre it's kind of a refuge, natural preserve, but it's like full of gardens and art, and it's over the top, right? And then there's some key guys that kind of meet there, and then we have a private lesson, and we were sharing, just having coffee before the training starts. And one of these guys is a Navy SEAL, CIA operator. And we were just sharing some stories. And one was, I said, the prayer of Jabez is huge. I was sharing it with just a friend before this trip. And then he said, oh, the prayer of Jabez was huge for me during COVID. And I had lost everything. And the prayer of Jabez is, Lord, that you would bless me indeed. So not just can I have a blessing, but bless me to a huge level. And expand my territory, and that your hand would be with me, that it would not cause any pain. So it's pretty well encompassing. But I remember reading that once on a cup. My grandmother had a cup. It was a coffee cup, and it was on there. I just read it with my words, and it happened. I mean, because I have clients, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, what happened? That just doubled. There's times then where later on I actually prayed it and it happened again. Then I started to tell people about it. And it's kind of hard for people to say, oh, I said, you have to pray it with your words. You have to use the voice that God's given you. Because you can think a prayer all you want, but if you're not using the voice that he gave you, unless you were born without a voice, then you're not really asking. So then I start to see things like God as a parent, as a father. And we as fathers, right, want to give our children everything. But what if they're not asking for it? Right? If they ask for it, here you go. I've been waiting for you to ask for this. Right? So I'm starting to see that relationship a lot more as God as a parent, as a father, as it says, I'm here waiting for you to ask. Now that was just financially, right? It was just a financial example. But I was at another kind of it was a seminar called a conference called Rise Up Kings. And it's held in Dallas, Texas. And I was there with Hanato. And one of the speakers was talking about, when Adam was hiding from God, right? They had already taken the fruit, and they were ashamed, and they were hiding. And that God was asking, where are you, Adam? Right? But he knows where Adam is, right? Just like we know when one of our kids is a toddler and they're hiding, right? Where are you? He's saying. What he was saying was that God made Adam to walk and talk with him. That's what they did in the garden. They would speak together. They would commune together. They would walk and talk together. And that was the thing that broke God's heart the most, was that, like, we don't get to have that anymore. Right now that you've done that one thing, we can't have this relationship anymore. Now you've chosen this over that. So I've just started to see a lot more of the things like that. I where prayer and the use of my voice to speak to him has so many different values. One is people will call it manifesting, but the other one is just that he wants to have that relationship that he made us for, to speak with him. Right? So many things that in the Bible, like, and I'm not a big Bible scholar at all, but I remember one study was the book of Proverbs, and that's lean not into your own understandings, but acknowledge him in all your ways, and he will direct your path. And then I realized, oh my goodness, what this means is, even though I know what I'm going to do every day, I have my list of things that I'm going to do. That's my own understanding, right? But lean not into your own understandings, but acknowledge him in all your ways. So then ask him, as I'm going out to this day, let me know what I need to do, or let me know if there's something else I need to be doing. And what is that? That's just connecting with him for that moment before you go out and you start your day. And then, just say, like, my relationship with God has grown that way. It's become more personal than anything else. That's what I'd have to say. More personal.
Yeah. I wonder, from a positive mindset, when I met you, I got the impression that you're a positive guy. And again, back to the faith thing, it's easier to be faith driven, to be positive when things are going pretty well. Like, it's
Sure.
much easier. But when things are going wrong, controlling your attitude and having a positive mindset is really the only thing that's in your control. In that particular case, is there things you've done? I don't know about your time in the military that maybe set you up for this, but as your son was going through what he's gone through, and even ever since, what do you do to keep a positive mindset in difficult times? Yeah.
I would have to say, a lot of that stuff was, being a young Marine and knowing how to be present in the face of chaos. And you kind of just go back to certain postures, right? Even if you're in a really tense situation or something like that, your posture of the way you're sitting, right? Because you're trained, okay, heels together, 45 degrees, and your hands at the edge of your knees rolled, right? If you're standing, then there's a position of being at rest, right? But your legs are spread shoulder width apart, and your hands behind your back or crossed in front. And then, of course, there's always the position of attention. So these postures that we're taught as young Marines become ingrained in the same way that our postures that we are taught in Jiu-Jitsu, right? Under attack, what are you supposed to do when somebody shoots a triangle on you? Immediately, straight spine, looking to the top, right? Looking to the ceiling. Why? Because that makes your spine straight, right? Same thing, how's your base, right? Are you up hard on your knees? You're going to get scissor swept. So we instantly now, as we engage in our roles, have a very wide base. Butt's low in the guard. Spine is straight. And these are the things then that we're taught, but then they become part of us. It's a reaction. It's just the way that we respond to a situation. So yes, absolutely. I would say my early military training had a lot to do with the way that I responded. Right.
Jeremy, talk to me a little bit about the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu community, because I don't train. I always say yet. But I've been very exposed peripherally through Jason and through a lot of the guests we've had on the podcast. But one thing I was thinking about as you were talking about both Jer's Jiu-Jitsu and how that helped him through treatment, and then you afterwards, the one thing that immediately came to mind is, you guys are always training with training partners. And I would assume that it was one of those things that maybe was difficult or touchy, of like, both Jer and you probably wanted to go in there and not necessarily be coddled or treated differently, because what you wanted is the escape. What you wanted is good roles, good training partners. And I'm assuming that required of the community that you're a part of, this understanding that, whether it was Jared coming in between treatment or you coming in after, like, they want a little bit of normalcy here. So I can't, treat them like they're, wrapped in bubble wrap. Like, I got to give them a little something. And that must have taken a lot of, like, discipline and understanding, and what Jason talks about all the time, being a good training partner in that, circumstance. So maybe just talk to me a little bit about how the community helped both Jer and you, and how they approached that, because I'm assuming that it was a tough balance.
Yeah. During the training or during his treatment, you mean?
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that it went any easier, because training's training, and you already have good training partners, so they're good training partners. It's not like you're a new guy, for the first time, and you're the goldfish that fell into the shark tank. So those things are already there.
I haven't heard it referred to as that, but that's a great analogy.
Right. We already have good training partners, but those training partners are there to test you. And, so it's always a fully resisting opponent, right? But what type of resistance are you giving? Is it going to be cool, calm, collected, and technical, or is it just going to be a spaz, right? So there's just wasn't much spaz, right? It was always good technical stuff. And if you got swept and you got, they're on the bottom, and that's just part of the training. That was just it. Yeah. I would have to say, like, afterwards, after Jared had left, my mind, my heart, my soul was so beat up and smashed that the physical side of jiu-jitsu helped to just cause a strange little balance. It said, okay, now the body's going to get it too. Right. But the nice thing about jiu-jitsu is that I always say this: whatever jiu-jitsu requires of you to sacrifice, whether that be in pain, right, whatever you have to endure, once you've done it, it rewards you twice. So
yeah, you can almost say the same thing about fitness in any fitness,
right?
But jiu-jitsu, you hit the nail on the head earlier about many times in life, we're either thinking about the past or focused on the future. Like, in general, that's where most people live. But in jiu-jitsu, you're in the present.
Yep.
And I again, not the exact same situation, but I have experienced many times the exact same thing as you. I remember leaving the hospital and going to jiu-jitsu and just like crying in the car and just getting there, and like the dudes were like, they're like brothers to me, right? Yep. They understood what was going on. We didn't need to say anything. We didn't need to talk about it. They knew what was up, right? And there's something about that brotherhood, that connection. Yesterday, I was talking to a former Navy SEAL about this idea of vocation. And this is, vocation is typically referred to as someone who like takes a vocation, like as a priest, right? But I was talking to him about this idea as a man of having purpose and protecting and providing. And he was trying to bring up that, like, not all men have to have a family to get that quote unquote vocation, that deep connection, that deep purpose, that deep why. And I find that in maybe in your son's case and maybe in your case as well, like you have this community at jiu-jitsu that allows you to make you feel that fulfillment, that connection, that deep resonation, that like this is your crew, and we're going to go and we're going to solve problems together. And I just think that's one of the blessings that jiu-jitsu provides, same as CrossFit, especially back in the day. But jiu-jitsu is just so intimate and so like aggressive that it encourages this conversation, Yeah,
and then there's those times where you showed up, right, after crying and just making it there. And then your friends are there, right? And they kind of know what you need. And you have that hand slap and that fist bump, and then they give it to you because that's what you're there for, right? And they know that's what you need, and maybe they sacrifice, a position for you, and then they work out of that, right? Or let you smash a little bit. But one thing is it's not, we're not always on our A game. We're not always full of confidence. We're not always full of sunshine and glitter. And it's funny because just the other night, a guy out here was saying, I feel invisible here, right? And I know that I'm not a really likable person, and I have a nickname for him, right? And I'll just save that because I'm sure it's going to come out. But the nickname has to do with, hey, you're always sad. You always, I call him sad so and so. Anyway, I said, how about? I said, we all have a different, view of ourselves, and that's fair, right? How you see yourself is probably going to be how you're portraying yourself then. And I said, instead, then, if you want to be seen, if you feel like you're invisible here, maybe you should come in then and engage at a level that you want to receive. Come in a little bit more up and energized, and ask people, hey, how are you doing? Right? It's crazy week, right? But you don't have to be down and hiding and just broken, but instead, show up. It's like what Master Hanato says about his inspiration about Jer was that even in his hardest times, he would show up with a smile on his face. He would show up regardless of everything that was in front of him that he was having to face this life challenge. He showed up and he was always had a smile on his face. So my advice to him was show up and engage with the same energy that you want to receive. Because we're not always going to be, there feeling 100%. And not everybody that we're around, all of our brothers are going to be feeling confident and like superheroes, right? Some are going to need a little extra something, but it's definitely not coddling we're going to give them, right? It's going to be, this is not that type of atmosphere for you to be that way, right? You don't start your roles that way, or if you do, you're just going to get smashed.
Right.
Yeah.
I kind of want to close out with this idea that like jiu-jitsu, doing hard things, where do you see that role for a man right now with his son? You got your son introduced to jiu-jitsu. My son does jiu-jitsu as much as I can get him to. What role do you think it takes in men overcoming hard things by exposing themselves intentionally to hard things? Like, is that the superpower? Is that the secret sauce? Is the secret sauce that, dude, you got to go out there every single day and go do something hard? And how do you instill that in your children?
Mm-hmm. You got to lead by example. One, right? There's no other way to lead. You can't be an armchair quarterback and tell them that they need to go train if you're not going to do it yourself. And there's lots of parents that are like that are, you'll see the parents that are there and they bring the kid to train, and but they never step on the mat. And they're often the parents that are just telling the kid what to do and what not to do. And so you got to lead by example, one. Two is, I've heard lots of fathers say things like, oh, well, he'll never beat me. And I would say, well, why wouldn't you want that? Right. And I can remember adjusting my size to Jer, right, and not use so much strength, but not that I was being soft at all, right, but I just wasn't using 100% strength, right, just to take it down a notch to 90, and then letting his technique would surpass my position. And I remember the day that I tapped legitimately was a wonderful day, right? Because then we can worry about them being in this world and all the horrible things that can come at them. And jiu-jitsu is just one of those things that's going to go ahead and physically prepare them, right, for sons and daughters. But also the life lessons that we learn along the way, right? How do you deal with overwhelming pressure in life? And I think it's critical to growth. I think it was critical to Jer's experience with his life challenge. Otherwise, I'm sure that would have been overwhelming and crumble any spirit to know what you're facing, instead of facing it with the same experiences that we receive on the map. Right? This is not the end. Right? You can handle this. So the biggest reward was training with him. It really was. And I encourage parents to do that all the time. That bond is great, but I also encourage them to learn from their children. If their kids are much younger, tune into them. Ask them, hey, how did you do that technique? And then, the more technical you get, just say, what part of your body were you engaging to get them to move in that direction, right? Because, everything's in the details, right? Of the technique. Is it the edge of the foot that's pushing onto the inside of the elbow? And then what's the other leg doing, right? And so kids, when you watch kids train jiu-jitsu these days, it's amazing. It is amazing the level of technique that they have. And there's a lot to be learned from them. And when you allow a child to teach you something, you're giving their confidence such a rush, such a boost.
Right. In anything, not just jiu-jitsu. Yeah.
Right. In
100%.
Anything. Exactly. Yeah. Tell me how you did that. Give them that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dude, Jeremy, I really
we can go hours on this subject.
Well, we're getting Gabe and Gabe. I think after this, dude, he's getting closer and closer to biting the bug, or is that the right term? Or biting the bullet was, I think.
How about you? Right? Some people do it differently. Some people travel around, right? And they visit different schools and stuff. And I think that in this type of, with a podcast and everything, you see on Flow Grappling, there's those guys that do Fix My Game, and so you can still go around, you can still travel around, you can still have a podcast and then get a little training in.
Gabe, you hear that?
Oh, I'm in.
And you'll get it from you'll be visiting legends, right? And then you're always going to learn somebody's money move. So then you didn't have to suffer through class, through a bunch of stuff. You're just learning a bunch of money moves.
Love it.
We're getting them. Well, hey, Jeremy, just, for those, I think obviously they can go check out, different social accounts and whatnot, but I think any kind of closing remarks for you about, for people listening right now, with what you've gone through, what's like just a kind of closing thing for them to reflect on as they kind of go on with their day to day and whatever they have going on?
Yeah. One is that as parents, we have a plan, that we have for our kids, right? Whatever stage of life they're in, we have this plan, right? You're going to do this and you're going to do that. By the time they're in high school, you're going to, graduate, and then you're going to go to this school. But our plan is just our plan. And what is in store for them doesn't always have to be aligned with our plan. We're not in charge of their life. We're there to guide them. We're there to encourage them. We're there to, pass on our experiences and I would say, show your soft underbelly too. Share your mistakes, right? Because that's real experience, is saying, hey, I've made a mistake here and there before, and I hope that you don't have to have that same experience if you just go ahead and do it this way, right? Jared, if anybody wants to really kind of get into understanding what those days were like for Jared, he had me write them down. He said, Dad, I want you to write everything down, the good and the bad, right? And that's called, I think it's called on Facebook, it's called Tap Out Leukemia. And of course, there's lots of links and stuff like that in the years that have passed. But if you scroll back to that time, 2013, 2014, then you'll see what it really took for a young man to endure that, and down to the the hard moments, down to counting the calories, and how important that was, just the little things. That was big for him. Even when they had said, one nurse, I remember her saying, like, hey, I heard you're gonna be an angel. And I didn't want him, I didn't want any type of words that lost hope. But he had got a big smile on his face. He said, yeah, I am. So all those types of crazy moments, man, if you want to read something about that and get real inspiration, I would say go there. There'll be a whole bucket full of facets of inspiration on how, what matters.
Jeremy, I just want to thank you again, and also thank Jared Jr., through you in many ways. I think that the one thing that's become incredibly apparent in you sharing his story and you coming on this podcast is just the incredible openness to use the experience to share and impart lessons and hopefully just help out a dad listening, just have a new perspective and a new way to approach things. And again, as a new dad, I just can't thank you enough, and really appreciate that. I'll go check out that Facebook page, and just thank you.
Yep. I think I would say one last thing then is, and I remembered this, kind of like in the midst of my grief, where I would listen to a song, and whether they're heartbreak songs, it's always about a relationship and breaking up. But I would say, falling in love with your children, you can't go wrong, right? And then that heartbreak song spoke every single word to the loss, right? But that was about, somebody's relationship, with their partner. But I would say fall in love with your children, right? Just adore them, and enjoy that blessing that you have been given. But also be responsible, with that young life, because we're supposed to give them all the tools, but not to our plan. Give them the tools of love, compassion, understanding, determination, the life lessons of nothing's free, right? Nothing is easy. The best things are the hardest things to achieve. And right, but I would say spend less time on your soapbox, spend more time leading by example, and then at the same time, keep an open communication and allow children to ask you hard questions as well, and you could give them the honest answers. Even today, I ask my daughters, always, if you don't agree with me, if there's something that you don't agree with, please let me know.
Yeah.
Right. That's what keeps our relationship going, is because I always invite it. I always want them to be able to have the freedom because they should never feel like, oh, I can't ask my dad that.
Right.
And that's the best thing. The biggest reward is if you can have that open communication with your kids, right? There's always respect, right? It can't just come off that you half cocked at the way that we communicate is huge. So you'll teach them how to communicate, but actually ask you hard questions, ones that might be uncomfortable for you to ask or answer.
Jeremy, I like Gabe said, I mean, obviously I was very moved by meeting you in person for Jiu-Jitsu. We really appreciate you sharing, Jer's story here, and just raising awareness. And yeah, I really appreciate it. For everyone listening, go back, take another listen, take this to heart. One of the best blessings that the podcast gives me, we record podcasts multiple times a week. And I just came back from a leadership summit at Echelon Front, and I'm sitting there and I'm listening to all these leadership talks, and it's very rewarding, right? But it's when you're sitting in the leadership conference, you're getting engaged on conversation, you're thinking to yourself, okay, how can I improve? The beautiful part about the podcast is I get that twice a week, right? At least, where we're having conversations about stuff that really matters, right? Like real stuff. Like this stuff matters. This is the stuff that later on in life you look back on and be like, dude, I'm grateful for this podcast, regardless of the financial growth of it or this and that, because on a weekly, regular basis, I get to talk to really awesome people and develop my own mindset. So selfishly, I want to say thank you very much. And for everybody listening, I want to thank you guys for checking out this episode. If you got value from it, if you took something away, share it with a friend as per usual and keep training hard. Thank you again, Jeremy. We really appreciate you.